I would like to call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Des Moines Public Schools to order for November 6, 2018.
Does it say October?
It's okay.
Oh, no.
I know what today is.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Natasha Newcomb.
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle Shelley.
Here.
Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Ellsbernd.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Barron.
Here.
The first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the agenda. Are there any requests to pull any items? Hearing none, may I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
I move approval.
We have a motion from Barron and a second from Anderson. Please vote. Agenda is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. May I have a motion and a second to approve the October 16, 2018 minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any discussion or corrections? Since I wasn't here for this meeting, I'll be abstaining. I think we're ready for the vote. Motion passes 6 yes, 1 abstention. The next item on our agenda is the consent items. Before continuing with our regular meeting, I want to remind the audience that we allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information table to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among the board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Ms. Ellsbernd, I believe you have the consent motion?
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $7,510,296.86.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent items. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item number D1, Monitoring Report on Elementary Reading, Part 1. I'll turn it over to our superintendent and ask him to introduce the item as our speakers come forward.
Elementary reading is one of our priority goals, and this is the first of 2 reports. The second report will be coming at the end of June, and so the board will not be voting on this report. They'll be taking in this information, processing it, and then the final approval or otherwise will come at the end of June. We have Susie Tallman, our Executive Director of Elementary Education, Kelly Schofield, our Elementary Director of Teaching and Learning, and we also have Jeff Panic, who is new to our assessment, data, and evaluation team. Welcome.
Thanks.
Good evening. We're here tonight to give part 1 of the Early Literacy Board Report. Just a reminder, our key performance indicators are looking at the percent of students at or above fall benchmark on FAST assessment in grades K-3, as well as percent of students above the fall at-risk cut point on MAP growth in reading grades 2-3. And the second key performance indicator, later in the presentation when we get to the MAP data, Jeff will explain that a little bit further for us.
Okay, we're going to start out and share some of our FAST data. Our first slide, which you've seen before, just represents the targets that we work through from fall, winter to spring with FAST, and shows that they do increase in difficulty as the students get towards grade level. So as we get students meeting the benchmark in each of those testing screening windows, that proficiency mark increases through each of those. Our kindergarteners that came in this fall we're lower in all of our student groups than have been in the past, or past fall. They're coming in, when they come in the fall, it's sometimes things that are out of our circle of influence. We just have to look at that, and some of the things that we consider are preschool, the number of students that are coming to us, language learners and those type of things. So we were able to drill down and get started with those students. We did have our data that showed our preschool participation, and it is a very strong argument that preschool is needed for all of our students, as you can see there. Our DMPS preschool programming outperformed our partner and neighboring preschools in most of our groups, especially in our ELL and African American groups. So, and we're continuing to work with that partnership with our DMPS preschool to transition the students that they're coming to observe our kindergartens. We're going to observe there. So we're still working to transition those students and get them ready for kindergarten. And we're seeing some of that, especially in some of our most diverse populations. So again, preschool matters. It's most impactful and pronounced for our African American, our free and reduced lunch students, our ELL and multiracial students, and that we feel like our DMPS programming is meeting the needs of these students, and we continue to work with them to do that. Our first grade students coming in the fall, we had a decrease in our ELL and our African American groups of students, but we showed an increase in our other groups of students. This particular cohort of students, when they started in the fall as kindergartners the previous year, we increased by 9% to the fall of this year as first graders. So we are looking at that and very optimistic with the progress we've made. We are working and drilling down with those populations, especially our African American males in our first grade, and looking at those in individual schools by individual students, and working with teachers in those groups as part of our tiered support system that we put in place for literacy to address the engagement and the access that those students are having to that instruction. So again, we have seen gains in most student groups, and our African American saw the largest decrease, and we have things in place to try to address that as we move forward. In our second grade, we increased in most of our subgroups. We saw a significant increase in our in our Asian and in our Hispanic and our white student groups. We did see a decrease in our special education subgroup, and when we looked into that, we are seeing that at the end of first grade, we are identifying those students into the special ed programming based on just, in K and 1, we're trying to do a lot of intervention. We're trying to change the core instruction for these students, and then by the time they get to the end of the first grade, they've been through several rounds of intervention. We're able to provide them testing, and many of them placed into special ed. So some of these students are showing up in the fall in that SPED group. So we are working with our special education teachers. Many have been trained in Orton-Gillingham. Most have been trained in Orton-Gillingham to deliver that during their specially designed instruction. We're also not pulling them out in K1 to get that foundational skill, so they're getting their foundational skills with their peers and getting their supplemental instruction on top of that. So we're hoping that that is going to show a larger increase in our second grade in the following years. We did see some significant improvements in some of our subgroups, and especially we did see a decrease in free and reduced African American we were decreasing the achievement gap in our free and reduced and African American, Asian, Hispanic groups, as we're seeing an increase in those student scores. In our third grade, we had gains in most of our groups, and what we did notice that The third grade showed the most improvement from when we started this testing in 2015, and most of our student groups showed double-digit improvement from 2015 to now. But this report, of course, is showing 2016 to now. But I did want to note that because the things we're putting in place in K1 and 2 are showing up in third grade. We still have work to do there, but we feel like we're making a lot of progress. And as we continue to use these tiered supports that we have in place in the schools, we think that our students will become strong readers by third grade. Our ELL student groups, we did show a decrease in several of our grade levels, and we're increasing the amount of ELL students that we have. So we're really working on the strategies in the different grade levels that meet their needs. So in K and 1, again, we are working to not pull them out of foundational skills. We're pushing ELL support into the classroom so that those students are getting those opportunities to be with their peers. We're increasing the amount of speaking and listening activities that go on in there in the multisensory in K1. And then in our second and third grade classrooms, we're really trying to drill down into vocabulary acquisition and language acquisition, putting in more supports and strategies that help build language overall. So we're hoping that will also show an increase there. We're very excited to see our statewide comparisons, as you see here. This is the growth from last year, 2016-2017, from fall to spring. And we compare that across the state, and our DMPS schools, K3, showed a 7% increase, which is a larger increase than some of the schools in our surrounding area. So we're very excited about that. We continue to grow. And then we also showed, if you compare to other urban districts around in Iowa, then we have shown increases there too and have outperformed some of those school districts. So we're very excited about that.
So before we go into the map data, Jeff is going to just take a minute to explain the next two slides of data that you have, because it's a little bit of a different look than you've seen before when we've shared map data with you. And then I will dig into the data a little further for you.
So there was a little change made in the format as well as the reporting that you're seeing in tables 6 and 7 in here. The primary reason for that was the requirements of ELLI, the Early Literacy Initiative or implementation, that asked us to identify students that were at risk. And what we had done in the past was we had established a system of on track for college readiness and then those that were not. Well, that on track for college readiness was a standard quite a bit higher than the at-risk component of it. And so we made those changes in this table, in these two tables, to help illustrate that. A cut point of the 30th percentile was established as that at-risk piece. That work was really done by Mary Grinstead. What she looked at was our kindergarten, first and second graders take a test called FAST. And what she wanted to do in essence really was to make sure that kind of that group that was at risk or identified at risk in FAST was about the same percentage when it came to MAP. And we didn't really have that. So she looked at those two different tests and said, well, this is the group that we're getting under FAST. Let's get about the same percentage of students in MAP as well. So we met as a group and established a cut point of the 30th percentile. So that's kind of arbitrary, but it was really based on trying to make sure that it was as consistent as possible as students transition from one test to the other. So when we look at this graph, what we have on there then is, and the change that we see in there is the dashed lines that you see at the bottom of each of those still represents that group of students that's on track for college readiness. We still wanted to maintain that data point in there. And then what we added on top of that then is, well, what is the group or what is the total percentage of students that are not at risk? So when we combine those students that are progressing with the students that are on track for college readiness, you get that entire piece in there. So that's what you see there in tables 6 and 7 and the changes that we made there.
So when looking at the map data, it definitely paints a little bit of a different picture than when we were looking at FAST. And it leaves us with a lot of thoughts. We've been having a lot of discussions and questions around the data as we continue to look into it and to dig deeper. But when you take a look at second grade MAP assessment, the percent not at risk and also those that are on track for college and career readiness, it's really kind of interesting when you dig into it a little bit further. In 2016, we took this assessment for the first time, and we have our baseline data. When you're looking at 2017 and most of our student groups, you'll see that there was an increase made with the exception of a couple of them. However, when you go from 2017 of last year to 2018 of this year, you'll notice that there is a decrease in most of the student groups. And so that has us wondering, why is that? Why are we seeing that? We know that in second grade, it's the first time that they're taking this online assessment, that's new to students. We wonder, are we preparing them well enough for that? We also, at the beginning of this year, had a lot of technical difficulties when students were taking the online assessment that really impacted them in the moment when they were testing, and certainly not trying to make any excuses in regard to the drop of the data, but we also wonder, okay, what role did that play in some of it as far as our second grade students go, and so that's something that we're looking more into, and in fact, we've collected additional information from buildings so that we can problem solve that ahead of time so it isn't an issue when students are in the moment testing. However, all students free and reduced, African American, Hispanic, white, student groups all did have a decline from last year to this year. However, our special ed population did have an increase from last year, and one group that steadily made progress was our Asian student population. We do have a concern, however, ELL and our multiracial student group has consistently popped out in regard to the data. I think, Kelly had also mentioned FAST, and so that's an area that we're continuing to look into, get some action steps in place, and to problem solve. We've already begun some things at the beginning of this year as well. Now, third grade is really kind of a mix, and what's interesting about third grade is Kelly just had mentioned that that is our grade level that made the greatest gains in FAST, and we really expect to see that as we've steadily made progress in FAST, that students are improving their foundational skills. And then, we believe that we will see that translate into MAP results, even though it's not an apples to apples comparison. But as we're improving the reading skills of students, it does get more complex when they're taking MAP, but that we should be seeing that transition over to and hoping to see that yielding results for students when they're taking MAP. So we wonder in third grade that we didn't see that this year. We pretty much in most all of our student groups saw a steady decline over the 3 years, with the exception of SPED, multiracial, and white. Their decline was from last year to this year. So, we're talking about already what are the conditions that we need to be setting in third grade. We've focused a lot on foundational skills. We're making good progress with that at third grade. However, now do we need to start building in more of an emphasis on setting those conditions when students are taking the MAP assessment, and how can we improve that? Not just at third grade, but second grade as well. And so that's been something that we've already been doing some planning and meeting with building administrators and looking at, what are some things that we can set into place for that as well. Again, ELO is one of our student groups that sticks out to us, not just based on what we're seeing in MAP, but also what we're seeing in FAST. So that would hold true for third grade as well. So, Kelly had mentioned we're really targeting kindergarten and first grade with the foundational skills. And we have a very solid plan in place where we're working with building administrators, we're working with instructional coaches, we're providing training to our kindergarten and first grade teachers. We also, when digging into the data, we found a couple buildings in particular with MAP that have made some good growth and progress. And so just digging into what they're doing and seeing, are there some things that maybe that's a little bit different that they've put in place that we haven't seen at some of our other schools, and how can we leverage that? I mentioned MAP conditions and what are some of the things that we can get put in place for our winter assessment that'll be coming up. And again, we're just continuing to take a deeper dive into the data. What's most important out of this, it gives us a good view of at a system level, but more importantly, we have to look at individual buildings and see what kind of a story that is telling us as well, because we see a lot of successes, but we also see, different areas of concern, and need to respond to that immediately for individual buildings as well. Questions?
Are there questions from board members? Mr. Barron?
You noted the increase from how the kindergartners progressed on FAST from kindergarten to first grade, and I think that's notable. And I looked at last year as well, and the same thing. You're able to report an increase so the kindergartners started out here on FAST, and then as first graders they started out a little bit higher. It wasn't as significant of an increase, but it's notable, and that's laudable, and that's a really good thing. And you talked a little bit about second grade, so I don't necessarily need more explanation, but that's the thing that I will be watching for, I think, in the future, because I think you're showing good effect. The numbers seem to be showing good effect at kindergarten and first grade, and then the question then is, how do we carry that over into second grade so we can keep that momentum going?
We definitely see a dip from spring of first grade to fall of second grade, and one of the things that the Early Lit team has been talking about is getting the first graders into that text and connected text quicker with more experience, because we can get them up to the benchmark and maybe a little higher in first grade, but the expectation is higher in second grade. And so they don't have the other subtests in second grade that sort of can bring those scores up for the students. So it's just the fluency that they're tested on in second grade. So we are really working hard on vocabulary, fluency to automaticity, not just mastery, so that we're able to, that they're automatic with those skills, those pre-fluency skills. So that is something that we are addressing, and we're hoping that that will show in our next year's fall second grade data.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And the only other thing I would add to that, for preschool, even though we see in kindergarten for all students, not just preschool, but all, that they're coming in at a little bit of a lower level, when digging into our preschool data, we're seeing in comparison that actually, when you look at our partner groups, when you look at our outside of the district preschool programming going on, that actually we're performing as well, if not better. Kelly had mentioned in our subgroups, but Susie Guest, which many of you already know, has, she oversees our preschool department, but she's been doing a lot of work in gathering additional data and conducting observations in our kindergarten classrooms, so that we're also doing a better job of bridging from kindergarten or from preschool to kindergarten. And we're identifying that there are some specific skills that we can be laying the foundation for in preschool and doing a better job, but then there's also things that we can bring from preschool up into the kindergarten classrooms, so that we're strengthening that transition and helping to better support students.
I appreciate that. And to that point, and to the point that Tom made in the executive summary about the need for greater 4-year-old preschool, in the appendix, I went back to the appendix and looked at the numbers on attendance or enrollment for students at the 4 different categories of preschool, which this is the first time, by the way, I'd seen the out-of-district preschool pulled out, and I think that was actually enlightening, and I appreciated that. but it's noteworthy. So you look at the group of kids, 4-year-olds who were kindergartners who were not served in a preschool program at all, and we know that that's a population that we want to serve, that we need to serve, that has an impact farther down the line. I looked at the free and reduced lunch numbers for each of the 4 categories. So the kids that we serve in preschool, that were about 3/4 of them were qualify for free and reduced lunch when they get to kindergarten. The partner programs, about half do. Out of district, about 40% do. The kids that are not served at all in preschool, 3/4 of them will come in qualifying for free and reduced lunch. So we know that there's an additional hurdles that those kids are facing right there. So it's just another argument that we need to be able to serve more kids in our preschool program.
Absolutely. And Susie and I have been talking about possibly extending or enhancing our Jump Start for kindergarten. So the students coming in, maybe adding to that, making it a little longer possibly with more instruction. So it wouldn't necessarily meet the same as a preschool programming would do, but it might be a little stopgap in that.
Yes, Ms. Langford.
Good evening. I want to start with kindergarten. I mean, we talked about it at our last board meeting. We understand that DMPS preschool, our students who have it, it's an advantage for them. But I'm wondering how many of our students that are incoming kindergartners aren't how many of our students are being served in DMPS preschool, like the raw numbers, versus those who aren't being served by either one of our preschool programs or our partner preschool program.
You want get the number of students that aren't being served by any.
Yes.
About 28%.
I got the percent, but
Oh,
I'm
but
just
you want
wondering
the
how many
numbers.
students.
What's that translate to?
I was trying to find it, I couldn't. Okay.
Yeah, it's,
Actually,
100,
90, isn't it
would
100?
you say?
It's 191, I think.
Okay. I'll go back and look at that later. I was just wondering for the context. And then
190.
in our overall, well, okay, I'll start with this point. I think something that is a little concerning to me, not just in our elementary school students in our reading, but I've kind of seen this across the board in all of our monitoring reports, regardless of grade level. When we talk about college readiness, when we're looking at our high school students and their ACT scores, their numbers are always really low, and that's really concerning to me. That, I mean, across the board, and of course when we're talking about students of color, free and reduced lunch, those numbers are even lower. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that from this age group, and what are those conversations looking like within the district?
Yeah, absolutely. Those percentages are, where we would want them to be, and we're equally concerned with where the numbers are at. And then coupling that with, if we're seeing a slight decrease, that's very concerning. So that's why we've already, started working with building administrators immediately when, getting the results, to begin digging into their own individual data, and then also to be looking at, what system impediments, what are things that are getting in the way for them as a building, but also as a system, what do we need to start better aligning, better communicating, what impediments, can we begin to remove that they're seeing that sometimes creates a challenge for them at the building level. So I don't know that if that's the getting to an exact answer of what you're asking, but absolutely, we have the same concerns with where the percentages are at.
Well, let me take it then to our map data, because some of these trends, this is our third year of looking at this data, so we're starting to see trend data. So I'm wondering then, what did the conversations look like last year when we began to see a decline with some of our students, like our ELL students, our African American students, and then how are those conversations differing from this year, right? Because I know we were having some of these conversations at this time last year, if we were looking at, so I'm just wondering, from where we were at last year, this time in the fall, how are those conversations looking now?
Well, we definitely are looking at student
students having more ownership in their learning, having more opportunities to think critically and analyze and discuss topics they're reading, stepping away from as much sort of scaffolding. So we're seeing maybe possibly some over scaffolding in classrooms. So students are not having as necessarily as a rigorous experience in their learning as they could. So these are some of the things that we've seen that we're addressing. We're addressing some more social-emotional type of things, bringing relevance into it. So these are some of the conversations that we're having at the school level, having at the district level, and trying to come up with strategies to help our students. We have trained our ELL teachers and many of our general education teachers in Be Glad strategies with guided language acquisition design, which has high academic content vocabulary. It builds vocabulary for all students, academic vocabulary and content vocabulary. And that model has helped us have discussions around what a classroom should look like and what our expectation of students are. So those are some of the things that we're talking about to move forward. If that
That's a great question, Dana.
Is it?
So I shared some data or a report with the board over the weekend that is going to be published soon that focuses on the schools for rigor in the first 2 years. And so one of the things that Kelly sort of spoke to without actually naming it by name is, and something that our Schools for Rigor program I think is really helping us hone in on, is that area of productive struggle. You know, supporting our students, scaffolding for our students enough that they can successfully engage before mastery, and then actually be really fully engaged in taking that learning to the next step. And so the data, and we don't have it broken out here because it's not the purpose of this report, but you'll see, especially with college and career readiness, with it, which is something relatively, MAP is new in the last 3 years, but also the concept of looking at college and career readiness at the elementary level is a new concept too for our teachers and our building administrators. But what we see with our Schools for Rigor is we're actually progressing faster there. And so part of the question at hand is, how do we shift what's happening in our classrooms such that we're not just focusing on an older version of, or an older measure of reading proficiency, but really looking at a more a rounder version of student development, like college and career readiness. So our Schools for Rigor program is actually addressing this need more successfully than our general program, which is why driving that forward and into more of our schools is really important.
Sure, thank you. My final question then is just around the goals that were set for each. You know, there's a percentage of students that we expect to see by the spring. How did we get to those target goals?
Sure. And I've had some conversations with Mary about that as well, being new to this position. In the past, they've just been maybe 5% percentage points higher, things like that. What I really tried to do was put a little more rhyme or reason behind it. And one of the things was to look just at trend lines, like what direction, what is that trend of the previous 3 years, or the 3-year trend of that. If it's increasing, continue at that current pace was the thought. So if we're getting like a 3% gain, or if that's been the trend, is to just have that continue. The other part of that then was, well, what if the trend is going in the wrong direction or going down? And basically I took the same premise there, or the same idea, but then just reversed it. So if they were decreasing by 3% each year, was to then flip that and have the next year be a 3% increase. So that was how those were developed. In this report, though, on the FAST one, as I examined last year's report, I didn't see that same sort of like a 5% increase or what seemed like a pretty natural incremental increase, because when you look at the FAST data, it's pretty flat, and then all of a sudden it jumps up to like the 70%. We want 70% getting that. So at the time that I put the report together, I assumed that that was kind of a hard target that we wanted to get to. looking at those kindergartners and first graders and thinking, well, when they take the test in the fall, that by the spring they've probably, as a group, made a tremendous amount of improvement in their reading abilities. So, yeah, so that one, and in those conversations I've had with Mary, I've said I'm very open to how we're determining that goal, but for the most part, it's been based on the trend in the data.
I definitely thank you. I think there's an opportunity for us as a board as we continue our work with Next Gen to just be more, maybe collaboratively, more intentional about how we set those goals and really what we can expect based on what we're seeing and give a little, just be a little bit more intentional. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm done.
Ms. Dela Gardell Shelley.
I had just a couple connections and then a kind of a celebration I noticed in the data that I didn't hear you guys hold up, so I wanted to do that. And this was around when we were looking at the multiracial students, that really got me thinking about the definition of multiracial and probably how we have more and more students identifying in that. And so is that a fairly new demographic that we're looking at? I mean, and by fairly new, I mean like probably within the last 5 to 10 years. Do any of you know, Tom? I'm just thinking because that can mean so many different
It's within
things.
the last 10 years where it's been a legally reportable or required
Right,
reporting.
because as someone who's identified as multiracial my whole life, I used to fill in other, and I think that's where probably most of these kids would have fallen in. And so that just kind of made me connect and made me think about how each of those kids probably fit in one of our other demographics. And then it also made me wonder, and this is probably something you guys dig into in your meetings, as far as in those areas where we are, especially in second grade, I wondered how many of those multiracial students also might fall under free and reduced lunch, and if there was a bigger percentage in second grade this year for whatever reason, and if that was reflective. It made me just wonder, and it's not really a question, but I just wanted to raise up to the board that when we're talking about this, that there's multiple identities that all of our students are falling under, and so are some of our kids being counted in multiple categories?
Yes.
Is that happening?
Yes, so in
Okay.
second grade in particular, you're speaking of, in many schools, when we're digging into that, those second grade students are, they are in multiple categories. So they are in free and reduced lunch, they're in special education, and they might also be ELL, right? So by second grade, we've ruled out that language is the issue. And that's what I was talking about, how many of these students kind of fall out in second grade because we've worked through some of those things. So in this particular group of second graders, that is true in many of the schools because they're falling into multiple categories.
Okay.
Right? And that's the same with our multiracial as well.
Okay. Well, and
that's
that-
how they're identified. That's how they're
they're identified when they're registered.
Right,
Yep.
yeah.
And I don't know, I've been doing this now for 14 months, but for whatever reason, as I was reading through this weekend, I was like, oh my gosh, these kids are falling under multiple categories.
Absolutely.
And it was just something with the data that clicked with me this weekend, so I just wanted to raise that up. And also, I appreciated particularly the cohort data, and I wanted to point out to my board colleagues and those in the audience that when we're looking at the executive summary, and we're talking about the gains that our first graders made, and I think also our third graders, that they were making pretty large gains in that cohort, so those kids that have been with us. So consistency for our kids within our system and whatever we're doing from year to year within our buildings must be working for kids. So I think this is just kind of raising up maybe even to the community of whatever we can do to support families in being able to consistently stay in their neighborhoods, stay in their schools with teachers and staff that they know that this is good for our kids and it's good for their achievement. So I just thank you for the work you guys do in carrying our kids year to year. So.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson? No questions? Ms. Ellsburn? Ms. Newcomb? I had a couple of things. First of all, thank you for raising up the cohort piece because that was something that I wanted to mention. I appreciate being able to see that because I think in the past we've always been challenged by this notion of sort of whether or not we're measuring the same students year over year or whether or not it's a completely different group. So being able to understand sort of what that group is consistently, I think helps to sort of put the data into context. So thank you for that. You talked a little bit about the technical challenges. Could you be a little more clear? Because I know we have something coming up that Tom shared with us in one of his board memos about the state now potentially requiring us to test all of our kids at one point, and we just don't know if we have the capacity. So I'm really interested in understanding more about that.
I'll let Jeff address that.
Thank you.
So probably the technical issues that Susie was talking about, MAP this year updated their secure web browser, and we have an issue where during the summer months, all of our laptops, a lot of our desktops are not turned on, and updates continuously occur. As a district, people are still getting online and using things and apps, and like in this case, the web browser for NWAA MAP was updated. And the system, it didn't pick it up in every case, and so there were schools that had out-of-date browsers, and they didn't realize that until they began trying to test students. So everything looks fine, and that happened in the case when I was running my test as well. Everything looks fine until the student actually tries to click on their name and enter the password that they've been assigned. And when that happened, all of a sudden they get a warning that comes up. And so then all of a sudden, whole classes were like, well, we can't do this today, so we have to wait and do it at another time. We also, as a group this year, we had artificially put a limited time on when we were going to allow students to map test, and that caused a lot of anxiety, I think, with our elementary schools as well. We didn't have to do that, but that was a decision that was made, and as we communicated with schools, we said, well, the window doesn't officially close, that there's still a couple of more weeks left, and I think that helped them considerably in that process. But it really was an out-of-date browser issue, and I believe that's been completely resolved now.
And we also had students, reported from buildings kind of getting kicked off the test, or they would have to reboot the computer, or something would shut down. So as they would start testing, then it would impact that as well. So I don't know that if that was as widespread, but it was a consistent, theme that we had heard.
Yeah, and as I've worked with our technology folks on that, that is really more of a secondary issue. And what I'm hearing from them is that if you have a classroom of 25 to 30 students, and particularly at the secondary level, and all of them have a personal cell phone device, that the Wi-Fi can't handle that capacity. And so what ends up happening is someone's computer in the room gets kicked off the system because there's too many devices trying to ping off of that. So one of the recommendations that I've been making as we go into this next round of map testing in preparation for the IO assessment, or the new IO assessment that's coming, is we probably ought to ask our students to at least turn their Wi-Fis off, if not shut their phones down completely, so we can eliminate that problem when it comes to testing.
Yeah, we're all learning quite a bit through all the testing, and we do want to work through some things before the IO assessment comes on board. And for elementary, there are some options with paper and pencil for this coming year. But we know that one of the things, not just the technical things, but students reading on digital devices is something that we need to explicitly teach and work with. That yes, they're digital natives, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can read online and know how to interact with that text and be able to do the things that an online test is asking them to do. So that is something that we're also working to address.
Good. And my only other question is, I know that we have in the past in some of our monitoring reports received some data around specific behaviors and other social emotional challenges that seem to be on the rise, especially for our elementary students. So I'm wondering if we are doing any cross-referencing of social emotional development and behaviors juxtaposed against some of the MAP or FAST scores to see if there is a correlation relative to students who are challenged that way relative to their ability to function at the highest level relative to the testing mechanism.
I would say, individual buildings, and more specifically, probably classroom teachers, do look at those things in supporting students and helping them as, you're getting ready for testing. As a system, I wouldn't say that we have necessarily collected that data yet, but I know that buildings more specifically do that.
Mm-hmm. It would just seem to me that with some of the data we're seeing sort of on the other side, that there may be some direct correlation that we may want to at least understand, so that we can put some of this maybe into a different context and be able to provide richer and deeper explanations of some of the things that we're seeing.
Right.
Other questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is item number D3, monitoring report. D2, sorry, one page too fast. D2, treatment of parents, owners, and volunteers. So I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the item as the speakers come forward.
Yeah, so monitoring report 2.2 will be presented by Kathy McKay, Sheila Mason, and Tiffany O'Hara, all three directors for us in HR/business finance benefits area. As I just want to note that 2.2 and 2.3 will have updated policies the next time around. The policies were updated, but this is backward looking. So these are still the older version of the policies. This report will look very similar to the one that you saw last year. We did experiment in 2.3, which is coming up next, with some hopefully more robust KPIs that that will work a bit better than last year's. But for now, 2.2, treatment of parents, owners, and volunteers. I'll turn it over to Sheila, Tiffany, and Kathy.
Thank you. As you heard our superintendent say, our current key performance measures are looking at parent complaints, communication figures, community staff, committees, and volunteer survey. And I apologize, this KPI is actually representing parent complaints. This KPI speaks to when a concern or complaint is registered as a formal complaint by a parent. A formal complaint would be described as a complaint of discrimination, bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, or Section 504 drugs. A notable data point is that the total number of parent complaints decreased from the fiscal year 2017 to the 2018 fiscal year by 5.
This next KPI addresses the communications that we use to connect with our community partners as well as the parents, staff, and volunteers. This would list those social media outlets that we utilize, as well as show you how many times we utilize those on a regular basis. The following KPI, or the following looks at what committees we utilize that we engage the community in. As we've noted, community engagement is very important and drives a lot of things in this district, and these are the committees that right now represent large community involvement.
And that last area we're going to highlight is the volunteer survey. We sent out a volunteer survey to 4,000 4,000 volunteers throughout the district that serve all of our schools. Most of the volunteers primarily come from our schools. They're typically parents or community members that have students or relatives in that school. So about 95% of them come from that pool. If you look at some of the highlights here, we want to really focus in on the hiring and onboarding process, where 99% of them agree that it's a good process. Although the volunteer application doesn't get as high a mark, once you get into the system, because of our limitations with AppleTrack, it does say employment application, but once you hit volunteer, it does go in and it simplifies the process. So we're going to continue to work on that. It's more of identifying it more as a volunteer application from the beginning versus an employment application. So I think that does cause for some confusion there. The volunteer application, again, in terms of awareness for volunteer information on the website. Right now, we don't promote those volunteer opportunities, but we are talking about doing that. So if anyone in general in the community wants to volunteer, they could go to the website and look for opportunities instead of it always being just directly related to the school where they may be a parent. Another thing that I want to highlight, and we all know that the biggest compliment anyone can give you is when they brag about you. So if you look at number 5, it says, I would recommend my friends or family to be a volunteer at DMPS, and we rank over 80 or 98% in that area. So I think that speaks well to our district. And that concludes our presentation for 2.2.
Board questions? Yes. We'll start on this end. Natasha Newcomb.
As far as going with the formal parent complaints and everything kind of goes side by side, I know a while ago, this is kind of outside of your presentation, we received a lot of information and data on like our out-of-district transfer requests, and those may not be formal complaints, but I think those are important numbers that may be included in this presentation in the future. I know it was a while ago when we got those numbers in a separate. Yeah. Remember those?
I do.
Yeah.
Remember them clearly.
So it'd just be a nice addition to this, I guess, this information, because even though, again, you're looking for the formal complaint, I don't know if you can get much more formal than requesting to leave.
Yeah, I would offer, though, that a lot of those come from kindergarten, incoming kindergartners who haven't had a chance to make a complaint yet. So point taken. I think it's worthy of consideration for sure.
Anything else?
Nope.
Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley.
I just had a point of clarification on the communication figures. Are we really making 2.6 million impressions on Twitter a week? Because that's a lot. Because when I was looking through this data, I happened to see a friend who is a comms professional and mentioned, like, we're making 2.6 million impressions on Twitter a week, and they were like, that's a lot. So I just wanted to clarify that, like, maybe we were looking at this as in terms of that everything was per week, like Facebook 2.4 million impressions a week.
And I have a feeling that has to do not only with the total district, but each individual school as well wrapped into that number.
Right. Okay.
And
I
can
just wanted to
clarify.
because it's a lot. That's a lot. So
I can clarify with Phil on that.
yeah. I don't know.
People like their Twitter.
Ms. Langford.
Well, picking off there, I did just want to highlight, it looks like we're really working our social media game. And so that's really, and people are engaging with it through our app, Twitter, all of that. So that's awesome. And people are using Infinite Campus. I have a question about our survey that we send out to our volunteers. I enjoy looking at that data when we look at this report annually. I'm wondering if we've ever considered doing a similar survey for families, for parents particularly.
We have been talking about doing more than one survey to our volunteers throughout the year so that we have some trend data to look at. That would include those parents who are also included in the volunteer survey, because we have many of our parents who are volunteering in our schools.
Absolutely, but several who aren't. I mean, in a district of 32,000 students, and I know I've been really impressed with our ability to gather information from our community with some of our other initiatives that we've done. And so just maybe something to think about, particularly for a report that's looking at volunteers and parents.
Yeah, and if you recall, we were anticipating using the new Gallup parent survey, and then the state decided that they were going to survey parents, so we didn't want to duplicate that effort. The state delayed for a year, and then what they came up with is something that's really not adequate. So we are actively looking at how do we get information from our parents. Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome.
for sure.
And that being included in this report might be something that we want to think about as a board down the line. And then finally, our complaint process. And I've had the opportunity to go into many of our schools and interact with several of our staff, and I've always had, for the most part, very positive experiences. But I am wondering what our formal complaint process looks like. So if a parent did want to make a complaint, how would they go about finding the information to do so, or what would they do?
We have information on our website that outlines the formal complaint process. It's a one form that actually the person writing the complaint can actually, within that one form, designate whether that complaint is one of discrimination or that complaint is one of sexual harassment. It's not separate forms, it's one. And then once that's submitted, that triggers a formal investigation.
Sure. And is that form available in any other languages than outside of English at this time?
I'm not sure.
That's okay. I'm just lifting up something for us to consider as a community together about what that looks like with our district being so diverse and so many languages being spoken, particularly around issues of discrimination. Families, where people can access that and knowing how to access that, particularly when a lot of our families may not have computers, it might just be worth beginning to think about. Of course, we don't want tons of complaints coming in, but we also, I wonder if we really have a solid foundation of info to look at, or if families even have access to a process. If there was an issue, if they know where to access that, or if it's even available to them in a language that they would understand.
Right, yeah, very valid point. I would also say that some concerns or complaints, however you describe them, that come into Office of Schools, that we typically deal with as a parent concern, sometimes they do get directed to, specifically to make a formal complaint if what they're talking to Office of Schools about warrants it, because it needs to go beyond, just perhaps a director problem solving with a building staff and parent. So we do have families that get directed there very specifically sometimes if what their concern is really requires a formal complaint process.
And that's helpful. And that might also be a place where a lot of our community bilingual liaisons are stepping in.
Sure.
Particularly as advocates. I just think about barriers and access for a lot of our families. If their issues were to arise, we should have a process in place where they know that they can go.
So I honestly have struggled a little bit with this report, and probably part of it is due to the fact that our next report was changed as far as the KPIs, and they are definitely much more robust, but we'll get there later. In the sense that the current KPIs, I don't think give as much evidence to compliance with the policy as they could, and especially in the sense of, and this is a conversation I've had ongoing with Tom, that we haven't come to a resolution about, but especially in regards to that sub-policy, that, toggle back to where that is, not fail to engage parents and owners when major issues come forward, including those representing a significant reallocation of resources for an attendance center or representing a significant change to the educational experience for students and families. And as I look at the planned KPIs, without a survey that, such as the one Deanna was talking about, I'm not sure that there's anything in these planned KPIs either that provide the right evidence for that either. So I'm hoping that there can be more consideration for something that does measure that, because I think that was a very intentional policy addition, and so understanding how that's playing out, because I'm not sure that it is in every sense, and without having even some there's some building level issues recently that we've been made aware of, which I believe have been resolved now, but without understanding how that communication plays out about major issues, for example, SRG, then we don't get a true picture. So I guess future, I'm hoping that these planned KPIs can be honed in a little bit more as well. And I do appreciate that the definition, the operational definition given to the policy. I think that's great. But the evidence I don't think completely there right now.
Other board questions or comments? Please.
Actually, and this may be the time that we can at least lift that up as a board and figure out, excuse me, we look at this thing one time a year. I would be personally, as an individual board member, really interested in hearing our parents' feedback around some of our key initiatives. I know at the table we hear our perspective from the data that we get from outcomes, from test scores, grades, that sort of thing, but I would be really interested to see how our community is responding to some of the major initiatives that we're doing in the district. And I think that there could be a place for some of that information through our monitoring. We've also talked about different forms of external monitoring that the board might get some of this information as well. That would be helpful. But I would agree that these KPIs, the evidence for us to really be able to meet the policy recommendations, definitely need to be beefed up a bit concerning our parents. Our volunteers, it seems, are very, I feel really confident looking at the information we have about our volunteers. When it comes to our parents, not so much.
I'm glad you brought up the external monitoring piece, because that might be something that helps.
Yep, so I was going to remind us that, as a board, we've talked a lot about the need to perfect our KPIs, which I believe is something that will come as we move forward with next board, and we have an opportunity to really do a deep dive into those. So that's something that we've been talking about and likely will get to sooner versus later. But I also want to remind us that we also have the opportunity for direct inspection, external monitoring, and a variety of other things that will allow us to inform our own selves around what's going on. And we have the ability at any point to exercise those opportunities. And I would certainly encourage us to think about what that might look like moving forward. And I know that we've talked a little bit about external monitoring, but I think this particular monitoring report points up a variety of different things that I think we've been challenged with, that we really have to push back on ourselves to really think about ways that we create a better set of metrics and greater information upon which to make our decisions. So we're going to own our part of it, but we certainly are going to ask the superintendent to do his part as well.
Yeah, I would also, and I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree. I would also ask just the question, not for discussion tonight, but do parents, owners, and volunteers all belong in the same policy? One of the things that we've striven to do is to reduce the number of KPIs in each report to 3 to 5, and to be responsive to, in this case, a pretty robust policy. I wonder if we might be better served by splitting those out.
I think so too. Any other board questions or comments? I believe this monitoring report is before us this evening for a vote.
I do have one more question.
Yes.
So you talked about that you had experimented or with these planned KPIs. Is that data available? Is this just something that was not?
Some is and some isn't.
Because what just came to mind was wondering about when would the isn't come about? When would you have the full? Do you have an idea of when you would have the info on these planned KPIs?
Well, part of it is we don't have a tool right now for some of it. And, there was thinking about taking the things that we thought we could do now, and then we thought, well, let's experiment with 2.3, since 2.2 we left in essentially the same form as last year, so as not to have too big of a shift. But
that's what got you in trouble.
That's what got us into trouble. Yep, we teased you with 2.3, and now trying to improve, and it comes
because
back
I was
and bites
just
you.
wondering, whatever if it would be worth seeing what you do have in that regard, rather than tabling this until we could see some of that. I don't know. That's just
Well, for instance, the provide a welcoming environment for parents and community, that's one that we would like to measure, and it wouldn't necessarily, that's in draft form. We don't have a good way to measure that right now, so we know we need a tool for that. We've given up on what the state's going to do through code to satisfy what we think our need is. So, yeah, it's in, I guess, embryonic stage right now.
Okay.
We couldn't really deliver in a set time.
Any further board comments? Yes.
I'm just wondering from my colleagues, is there any, do you guys see some validity in what Superintendent Ahart was saying in terms of splitting up owners,
Yes.
volunteers, parents? Because I think so too, because I could look at this and absolutely approve it for
Yeah.
our volunteers, but just don't feel like the evidence is there fully to be able to say whether this is compliant or not for our parents and owners.
That's sort of an apples and oranges comparison when you look at the data points that are used to reflect that, so.
Right.
I think we've been challenged by that before, and I think we just need to decide whether or not we make that change in our policy.
Which would, is that it's literally just breaking the two apart.
Correct.
Essentially, right? Which wouldn't be super intensive.
Should be pretty easy.
Do we have to have a separate work meeting to decide that, or can we say that that's something that we're interested in if there is some sort of consensus around that? Just because I know our board work plan is pretty extensive and nobody's crying for more meetings.
Well, I do think moving forward as we begin to, drill down into policy governance, monitoring, KPIs, all of those things, there's going to be lots of room for movement, change, tweaking, et cetera. So I think that we should reserve the opportunity to do that when we get to that point, but recognize that that's something that we do indeed want to address at some point. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, any additional comments or questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the monitoring report 2.2, treatment of parents, owners, and volunteers.
Move approval.
Motion from Barron, is there a second? Second from De La Gardelle Shelley. Are there any additional board comments or questions before we move to the vote? Hearing none, please cast your vote. Motion passes 5 yes, 2 no. Thank you for your presentation. Now we will get to monitoring report 2.3, treatment of employees. I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the item, and then we'll go to our speakers, and then we'll go to our presentation.
Okay, monitoring report 2.3 is treatment of employees. This is one that is a challenge every year, having appropriate data that actually speaks directly to the policy. What we've done in the past, as you might recall, is have data that was very specific to what's stated in the policy. That is not met with universal approval by the board, so we've tried to beef that up. And how we've tried to beef it up was not just stabs at the dark, but really what else are in similar policies around the country, at similar districts around the country, what are they looking at, and how can we somehow benchmark what it is that we're reporting to the board in a way that can be benchmarked against similar populations around the country. So what you'll see is some KPIs that were shared in the past on this policy, but also some additional measures that we think fleshes out what the policy is about, even if it's not specifically referenced in the policy, and in a way that we can compare ourselves meaningfully to other similar districts from around the country. So with that, I'll turn things back over to the same three presenters from 2.2.
So before we go to them, I'll do our public speakers. So our first speaker is Bobby Spear. If you could please come forward, name and address for the record.
I'm Bobby Spear. My address is 2338 East 14th Street here in Des Moines. I didn't have a chance to read all the way through any of this. I've been spending too much time on a bus. But to go through some of the treatment of employees, I was flipping through the handbook, and like family illnesses leaves are getting denied, personal leaves are getting denied. The use of comp time, we have people that have hundreds of hours of comp time that have to have it used by December 31st that are getting denied. Can't use it on top of a holiday, can't use it with a vacation day, can't do other things with it. The treatment and disparity with the employees are in a wide range right now between a lot of different departments. I'm not gonna just point at one because right now I'm actually in two, but I work with several. The denial of requests to be absent, people have been putting a request in for medical treatments and everything weeks in advance, even giving a doctor's note of what they're having done and getting them denied on the spot. People are getting tired. They're actually breaking physically, not just mentally. I mean, one, we don't want to be outsourced. Two, we have that in the back of our mind when we see Durham come into the bus garage. And I'm not even going to these meetings, but I see them in the hallway to do meetings. When we see Dart down there having more meetings, you know, that's just thought processes, and it's really breaking down everybody's sense of, you know, what are we doing? We're supposed to be here for the kids. That's what we're doing. You know, I have been up for 15 hours myself, on the clock for 12 of it. I mean, I'm exhausted. We're losing good people because discipline and discharge has basically went out the window. We don't get oral warnings anymore for anything, even if it is something minor. We go right to suspensions. Sorry. We go right to suspensions. We go right to, well, you either do this or you're going to be fired. The union has been getting threatened in order to try to save jobs. Family Medical Leave Act. I got a threatening letter myself, personally, and I know several other people have too, but I won't name names. I'll just talk about me personally. I got a threatening letter that my job was going to be posted because my FMLA ran out, and I was going to lose my position. But I had to have an emergency surgery, but I didn't get the time to recover from the emergency surgery after the first surgery. And now my whole foot is a mess because I had to come back to work in order to secure my position, or I would have lost my insurance. I would have lost my position, even though I had 9 months of sick time accrued to where I had the sick time, might have saved my insurance, but I wouldn't have had a position to come to. They'd have figured it out when I came back to work. And that's basically what the letter said. This is what we're dealing with as a group. I can't speak for the teachers. I don't know what their rules are. I don't get to talk to them as often, but I'm talking about operations. I mean, we're just getting beat up from one side to another. If they ask to look at a tape and they can't find what they're looking for on a tape, then it's a fishing expedition, and we're just going to find whatever we can to write you up on. And I don't know how to fix it, but I tried to bring it up in LMC the other day. We didn't get to it because we ran out of time, and now it's on here. And we're gonna go through a report, but I wanted you guys to be able to think about that for a second and maybe work with all your groups and find out a reason of what's going on. So this is just me reaching out to you guys for a little extra help because we're not getting it from anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Our next speaker is Gail. Chiaramonte.
Yes, it's Gail Chiaramonte, and I live at 4840 Northwest 50th Street here in Des Moines. I'm going to read a little bit off of my notes because instead of looking at y'all all the time, just for the fact I want to save my 5 minutes. So, first, I want to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to talk regarding the treatment of staff. And I understand that the topic is on the whole Des Moines public school system. However, I do feel you need to know some certain individual departments need to be addressed when there's employees that are working in hostile environments. And prior to joining Des Moines Public Schools, I retired from one of the major photography corporations after being there for 23 years. Throughout all my careers, I have had 31 years of management experience, including being a district manager for 2 different companies. I say all of this just so that you realize I am not an inexperienced worker, and I am not inexperienced at managing employees. I have been a part-time bus driver in the district since July of 2014, and in that time, I consistently worked to provide safety for the students while following all the procedures. In doing so, my part-time employee, I have consistently worked full-time hours and near perfect attendance, only 2 sick days in my whole 4 years. My reviews have been consistently meets or exceeds expectations, and I have greatly enjoyed working with the kids, a number of very caring and dedicated coworkers that I've worked with. When I reported back to work at the beginning of this year, I spoke to management about a once-in-a-lifetime event for a family celebration in which my godfather had gifted me an all-expense-paid trip to Hawaii to attend in October for 7 days to attend a family gathering. I followed all the steps that I was given and applied for a leave of absence immediately, which was a 2-month notice, and I was denied by Human Resources. So I pleaded with Human Resources, I pleaded with our supervisor that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I had the opportunity to go, and with my attendance record and with my performance, I should be given the opportunity, but I was told I could not go at all. So I sent a letter additionally to 3 upper management individuals, hoping that someone would help, but we got no help. I got no help, I'm sorry. Therefore, I chose to go, and that was my decision. But my family does come first, and you'd go if you got an all-expense-paid trip to Hawaii too. But I knew I was going to be disciplined up to and including being terminated. So when I returned, I went right back up to work, started the day that I came back, just like usual. I had to wait 1 full week before being called in to discuss the situation to be disciplined. Upon receiving my discipline, which I received 5 days of suspension, but not to be served immediately, to be served on their time period. So I got 3 days 1 week and 2 days another week, but I had to go in and work the other days that I wasn't on suspension. So that was at their discretion. I came back, they asked me to come back, and I had to come back later that afternoon to sign my written report. And when I came back, it took about an hour to wait, and then I was told it wasn't finished, so could I come back after my morning shift? I came back after my next morning shift. She didn't have time because there was a meeting, so I came back after my evening shift, and it finally got signed. After that, I found out that there was another approval for a week-long fishing trip for somebody else. So that was my ending point. So while I got no little consideration or respect it was given to me, I still gave my 2-week notice. And tonight, I'm not here just to address my situation, but I'm here for all the other ones that work. To treat employees different in similar to treat employees different in similar issues is unacceptable. Since the beginning of 2018, that's only a span of 10 months, we have lost over 25 drivers and associates in our business. That should be a red flag in itself. That's like a quarter of our drivers. There are real reasons that we are short on drivers. Some of them are working 10 to 12 hours daily, stress of consistently covering routes last minute, working sick because we were harassed if we called in, not being supported when we need support with student behavior. Not only were we not supported with for student behavior, but we were reprimanded for not controlling our buses, even after watching tapes. All the while, just recently in a recent training session, a driver was making a point on writing up students about 8 different times that they've written up these students and they were getting no help and they wanted help. And the speaker actually attacked the driver and embarrassed him, and he's no longer with us also.
I'll need you to wrap up now.
Okay, sorry. In my 4 years, the work environment has changed drastically, and management commentary on the issue is that if people don't like the job, they can leave. That's just not right when we have employees who have been there for double-digit years, and we like the students, we like what we do, and we're making a difference in a child's daily life, and we like our fellow drivers, but it's not fair if we're being treated unfairly, mistreated, harassed, retaliated against, and also having to worry about discipline or termination. Thank you. Sorry for going over.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Steph Ann Stacy.
My name is Steph-Ann Stacy. I live at 1410 Burlington Terrace here in Des Moines. Thank you for pronouncing my name right. Not many people can do that. For some.
That was an easy one compared to.
So I wish to thank all of you for your time and considerations into these issues that are very near and dear to each one of our hearts. As you can see, there are a number of people who are here that are representing transportation and operations. Within the last week, I have put in my 2-week notice. From a job that I truly love, one that I've never, ever had a problem with. But I'm doing it to make a statement. I'm one of the people in the department that have received good differential treatment to excess. And it affects the morale of the entire department because many people see this differential treatment. And I can no longer stand and watch it happen. I can no longer stand and watch my fellow employees be treated on such a level as they are being treated. They are right. There are people, and I have personal experiences of which, as the previous speaker spoke about her disciplinary action for the way that she requested that time off, I had a true no-call, no-show personally within the last year. Not only was I not called in, I volunteered to go in and state, I deserve to be disciplined. This was my fault. It was not malice, but it was my fault. In return, from management, I got, don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. This is why I'm leaving. This is why over 25% of your transportation department is leaving. Why I'm asking that you take consideration, because it's not just a morale issue. When morality is this low, our concerns are not where they should be, which is the safety of the children that we're transporting on a daily basis. When policies are disregarded, safety policies such as drug testing, again, personal experience. When safety policies are disregarded, then you have an issue. We transport a large number of children daily. I work 12 hours a day. transporting those students. I transport myself in an 83-passenger vehicle over 400 students a day. If I'm exhausted because we're violating regulations, who's that affecting? Legality. How is that going to be affected? How long do we want to continue to play these games before the students are affected, before there's a fatality? Thank you.
Thank you for being here. The next speaker I have is Kurt Bauermaster.
Superintendent Earhart, and Council, I appreciate being here. I've been on a school bus since 6 o'clock this morning, had a small break in midday, and then came back and rushed down here to get here in time because it's that important to me. Believe me, I would rather be sitting at home right now doing something else, but it is very important. You can hear the passion in these drivers and the associates. My name is Kurt Bauermaster, 1529 41st Street in Des Moines. Sorry about that. When we pick up students in the morning, we are the first representative of the school district to interact with them and the last to interact with them at the end of the day. We don't know how their day went, but we try to ask them, how was your day? Try to be a friendly face, probably something they don't see a lot of in a lot of these homes. How many of you have ridden on a Des Moines school bus? How many of you have ridden on a Des Moines school bus in the last year? You have? How was the experience? Was it good? Yeah. Pleasant? Okay. You probably weren't on a route that is challenging. I drive a 40-foot long, 83-passenger school bus. Sometimes there are 3 to a seat in that thing. That's 83 students. Most days I have 40 to 50 students on the bus on my routes. I put over 110 miles a day on the route driving in Des Moines streets. When teachers criticize us for the job we do, I say, okay, imagine sitting in front of your classroom with your back to the class. You have to maintain discipline in that class. You also have to negotiate traffic, people cutting you off, people running your stop arm. Imagine that scenario. And you can't get out of your seat to discipline those kids, okay? That's what we deal with on a daily basis. There are many unfair policies that we deal with. One that I've been penalized for, if we have 3 turn downs on field trips where they offer us a field trip, if we say no 3 times, we are taken out of that field rotation. So we lose the opportunity for that income. Most field trips are nights and weekends. I don't think it's fair that policy exists when it's not during school hours. And I'm not the only driver. There are like at least 6 I know of that are affected by that same policy. I've asked management to address this, and I've been told we'll talk to people. We'll get this figured out. I keep asking, how are we coming on this policy? Because I'm missing out on field trips. No response. The reasons there's a driver shortage. I've been at Des Moines schools for 6 years. I've been a full-time driver for almost 3 years. I've never seen employee morale as low as it is. Many professional, responsible, caring drivers have left to seek better workplaces, better work environments. There's a lack of communication from management to staff. There's a lot of miscommunication between management and staff. Thursday, August 25th, we had a training session. That's almost 2 weeks ago. Drivers and associates asked questions, and when management didn't have the answer, they said, we will find out the answer. And so everybody can know that answer. We will post it on our community bulletin board that we have at the office. It's been almost 2 weeks. Nothing's been posted. A lot of questions have gone unanswered. A lot of buses are down. They're out of service because the mechanics are out driving bus routes instead of doing their jobs repairing buses and fixing buses. I've been in a spare bus for almost 2 weeks now because my bus has been down and no one's there to fix it. There are safety issues with these buses. There are times when I don't feel safe driving a bus and I report issues and they'll get around to it eventually, but nobody's there to fix it because they're out driving routes. And I know there's a lot of frustration with the mechanics down there. A lot of frustration with the associates. I have a route that is supposed to have an associate on it because I have special needs kids on some of my routes. They put a new student on one of my routes from Monroe Elementary, and as they were saying, okay, here's your new student, they said, oh, by the way, he's prone to seizures. I have no associate on my bus. So now I have to negotiate traffic, deal with 40 to 50 kids sticking their heads out windows, doing God knows what behind me. Now I have to keep an eye on a student that's prone to seizures. Well, finally, 2 days ago, they've started putting an associate on my bus to help me out. So I've got about 30 seconds here. I just want to wrap up. This is a very emotional issue for all of us, and we want you to know that things are not well at the Transportation Department of Des Moines Schools, regardless of what you may hear. I encourage you to come down and ride on a school bus, experience what we experience, get on a bus with a lot of kids, and just sit there and watch. Or watch some of the videotapes, pull the tapes, everything is recorded, it's all on there. I encourage you to experience that. I'm planning to resign my position at the end of this semester to pursue other opportunities. After 6 years, the stress and the emotional baggage, it's just not worth it. So I'm going to pursue other opportunities. So I'll be giving my 2 weeks notice before the Christmas break. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Okay, I think we'll turn it over to our presenters. You have anything else? Okay.
So the first indicator of this KPI talks about the total number of employees that have left the district through either retirement, resignation, or termination. This measure is important because it can be an indicator regarding district policies, administrative procedures and regulations, and management effectiveness. Some notable data points in this data would be our largest turnover group, or group that experienced the largest amount of turnover, were our teachers. Our group that experienced the lowest amount of separation were our employees that were exempt, non-school-based employees. In comparison to our counterparts from the Council of Great City Schools, Des Moines Public Schools is performing on par. The district ranked 15th out of 44 responding districts to most of the recent KPI comparisons for the fiscal year 2017. The next KPI speaks to the number of teachers retained after the first year of employment and the number of teachers retained after the 5th year of employment. This KPI is important because it can be an indication of measure on a couple of things. First, it can take a look at our new teacher and induction mentoring program, and it can inform revisions in that program. It can also help and notify or inform our selection process or our hiring process, as well as our opportunities to engage with colleges and universities about the preparedness of our graduates into the teaching field. A notable comparison or data point in this KPI is in comparison of our Council of Great City Schools. Des Moines Public Schools is performing at the top half of districts, scoring 22 out of 51 responding districts compared to most KPIs on the fiscal year of 2017.
Looking at the health insurance benefits for the district, we chose that KPI because it shows our commitment to the benefits for the district and knowing that benefits are an important part to recruitment and retention for employees and staff. Our KPI here shows on the health benefits, you will see it's broken down by cost per employee covered for health insurance. We as a district fall a little bit above the average for the Council of Great City Schools. So you will see that the range there for the cost is significantly large. One school district reports the lowest, which was like $600 roughly per covered employee, up to over $12,000 per covered employee. So there's a significant range there. Again, we fall right, we're above average, but we are not the highest in that. Something to consider in that is our benefit structure, not only the coverage that we offer to employees, but that we also the coverage and the premium structure that accompanies that coverage. Our district covers right now, of our total employees that are taking health insurance, about 75% of those are covering more than just themselves on the plans.
Kathy? Well, I'll wait. Go ahead.
The next slide talks about the enrollment in those health plans. Our enrollment right now, we're at about 88%, almost 89% of individuals who are eligible to be covered under the district plan are enrolled in our plan. Again, that just shows the commitment to the benefits that we have and the importance that our employees place on those benefits. If you'll notice on that graph, I just want to point out, it takes a significant dip and then goes back up. What that is based upon is, as we were looking at these KPIs, we're developing our structures in place in order to report them. The KPI is total benefit eligible employees. How many people are eligible for benefits in comparison to those that are enrolled, active employees enrolled. When we first started to look at this data, going back, we didn't have that data. So we used total employees enrolled in insurance divided by total number of district employees. As the years have progressed, we've refined that data, so now we have that actual KPI.
The last two slides that we'll review today is treatment of employees as it relates to misconduct investigations and discrimination complaints. And when employees, if you think about all the interactions that are done on a daily basis between employees, supervisor to staff, employee to employee, this is what this graph here is trying to indicate, that based on misconduct investigations per 1,000 employees, how we compare to the Council of Great City Schools when an employee formalizes their complaint. We have several complaints or concerns that are taken to supervisors on a regular basis, and when they can't informally be taken care of, then an employee has an option to go to the website and file a formal complaint. So these numbers only represent those that were formally filed and that an investigation was taken place through the HR department assigning that investigation. So as you can see, we averaged about 11 complaints per year. We rank 7 out of 41 with the Council of Great City Schools. And this year, this past year, we were at 1.7 complaints or misconduct investigations per employees. The next slide is a representation of the discrimination complaints. And these are complaints that rise to the level in terms of being formally filed when it relates to discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, or hostile work environment. So again, this is a representation of the number of complaints per 1,000 employees. And as you can see, we are not as well represented here as the Council of Great City Schools. However, we have in the last 2 years made a significant improvement here. We've worked very hard to formalize the process online. It spells out in detail how to file a complaint. The actual policies for discrimination complaints is with the link online when the person fills out the form, so they can review the policy as it relates to their situation and then proceed with their formal complaint. It also details the steps that will be taken in terms of response time and who will be discussing their concern with them in the next steps. And that's all we have for the 2.3 treatment of employees.
Board questions? I'll ask my one question. If you go back to the slide, the benefit slide. The one before that. There we go. So this is health benefits cost per enrolled employee. So these are our costs for medical, dental, vision, for everything, or is this just
health?
Just health?
That's
Okay.
medical.
Okay. So I guess my question is there a comparison that shows the percent of health benefits costs covered by the employer as a frame of reference? In other words, we know that we do 100% coverage for the individual and family, correct?
We do if they earn their wellness incentive. There is that
Right.
and that they could pay if they don't participate in wellness.
Right, so this really is just a general health benefits cost, but we have no comparison relative to the amount that we provide to support the employee versus other districts.
I can look to see if there is a KPI that we could utilize to benchmark ourselves.
I think as you see the yellow on that one, the yellow line going down and the blue line going up, it definitely suggests that that the benefit package is richer, relatively speaking. But no, we don't. You're to that point. We don't have exactly an apples to apples comparison on what's being provided by each of those comparison districts.
Okay, thank you. Other board questions? That was just a starter to get everybody an opportunity to generate your thoughts. Oh, and we have plenty. I'm going to start on this side this time since I started on that side. Any board comments, questions, concerns? Yes.
I guess
Ms. Anderson.
I'm concerned with the speakers that spoke earlier, just concerned.
Is there a specific question you have relative to
I
their
don't know
concerns?
that there's a question. I mean, obviously, those aren't formal complaints, but there were, I believe, 5 people that spoke. Did you say there were 11 for the whole year, formal complaints?
I think that was on misconduct.
Oh, okay.
I think.
So fiscal year 2018, there were 8 misconduct investigations.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a backward-looking report, remember, so this is covering FY18, not from July 1 forward this year.
Okay.
And discrimination complaints, there were 6 formally filed.
I don't know if I have a question. I just don't know if I can feel like I can vote on this tonight.
Other board questions? Mr. Barron?
I think it's fair to ask for and expect some additional information from the district, especially given the constant messaging we get about the need to hire bus drivers to better understand the dynamics of our staff, and are they staying, are they leaving, what's going on? Is it relative to the report? Classified non-school based staff would include our bus driving fleet, correct? Okay, so then they had a 24% employee separation rate in the last year, which is nearly double or about 10% higher than where they were before. So I think between the information that's provided by the district and what the speakers had to say, I think it's fair to ask for some additional context, which you can start out written or however you determine with board leadership, and then the board can determine if that's sufficient and move forward from there. I imagine this is a concern that a lot of folks have, and a lot of folks would be looking for more on this.
So I think over time and circumstance, we've had a variety of different metrics to inform this particular report. We've had information on grievances filed, time to settle grievances. We've had turnover rates for various classifications of employees. So again, our ability to be specific about how we gather the right pieces of data to inform not only this report, but all of the others, I think is something that we really have to focus our attention on. And I concur that if there's additional information that can be shared to inform some of the speakers' comments and in varying categories, I have 7 or 8 different things written down here. I think that might be helpful just to help give the board a sense of addressing their unreadiness at this point. How's that?
Sure.
Cindy?
I guess I was just going to mention that I do appreciate the change of KPIs here. I do appreciate seeing at the end as an also the print screens and the employee handbook information, and then that replaced with teacher separation and or employee separation and other KPIs. I would assume, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but we are comparing ourselves to council schools, which I think is great. But is it safe to assume that a next step, and maybe this is what we get to when we're working with our coaches, is that we'll somehow measure progress toward a goal?
Mm-hmm.
In if we want to see ourselves improving toward the top half of Council of Great City Schools, then I would imagine there's a target that we would try to hit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
At some point? Okay.
Yeah, that whole notion of measuring against
Yeah.
ourselves as opposed to measuring against a goal, and especially in this context.
And I do appreciate the measurement against the council, just to see where we land with other urban districts across the nation. But yeah, I look forward to our continued distilling of these reports.
Ms. Langford?
A few points. The first being, it is really encouraging to see the district's commitment to our benefits program, and that we realize that that's something that's really valuable to our employees. And to see that in our monitoring report, I thought was extremely helpful. I want to raise the same issue that I did with our parents, owners, and volunteers report as with this one in terms of our complaint process and how folks can access that. I know several of our staff who particularly are on the classified side of our staff structure, oftentimes English isn't their first language as well. And so do we have documents and complaint forms that are in other languages? Or I don't know if that's looking at who really is in our workforce. And I know that there are resources that it takes to do that, but starting to think about offering some of those forms in other languages, and maybe in a place outside of a website as well, unless there's like a place within district offices that could be held, something to think about and lift up. And then in terms of the monitoring report, to me, this kind of fits into a larger conversation that I know I've been having with several of you as board colleagues, and that is the space that it's very informative. Dr. Ahart and the administration, we need your perspective. Obviously, you own what's happening within the district, and so we need, clearly, the data that you present to us to do our jobs efficiently. I personally am of the belief that, however, there are other perspectives within the district, right, that we don't get access to at this table in terms of our monitoring. We don't necessarily hear the voice of our staff, or we've heard our students through our Gallup data, which I think is really informative, but I think that we need to really start to think about seriously as a board how we are going to incorporate the voices of particularly parents and staff into our monitoring. And I know we're doing this work with Next Gen. Next board. I didn't call them Next Gen 3 times. I apologize, Next Board. But that, I believe, has to be something that we really prioritize moving forward in our monitoring, however that looks. And I agree with Cindy in terms of also highlighting some goals. Where do we want to be in terms of how do we measure for meeting expectations? And then finally, in referencing to our speakers, I actually would push, because this was particularly we heard from our transportation and operations department. And so I personally would I don't know if I would be good with just the email. There were a lot of serious claims that were stated today that I think weren't, from a board perspective, that I would really want more insight into. So I don't know if that looks like a work session. I don't know if that looks like, for me, I think that goes a little bit beyond the email to provide some of that context. I can't speak for my board colleagues. I would love to hear your perspectives on that. That's all of my thoughts.
Ms. De La Gardelle Shelley.
Yeah, and looking at this data, one of the first things that popped out to me is the chart on page 5, which just outlines our, it's our separation, I believe, by group, going all the way back to fiscal year 2014. And if we look at, since 2014, the average across all groups, we're probably 80% higher than what we were at that time. But when we look into specific ones as have already been raised up, there are others that are very high, particularly in some of our groups where we constantly are hearing, you know, we don't have enough bus drivers. And so having heard some verbal accounts tonight, it makes me wonder a couple things. And one of those is we heard several times that perhaps procedures aren't being followed or they're not being applied fairly or equally. And I know there are some confidentiality that prevents you from sharing with one employee the situation of another employee's situation. But appearances, having worked in schools, I know that appearances of when this happens, it affects morale. And it just makes me wonder, potentially, that we should ask ourselves 2 questions. One, is our procedure actually not being followed? And if that's the case, then we need to fix that. Or 2, is it that our procedure feels inhumane to our employees because of the way that we're administering it, because of the way that we're communicating, or some other thing that we just need to, it might not actually even be a policy or procedure, but it just might be the way in which we're delivering our messages to our employees. That I would just ask that sometimes those are pretty cheap fixes of just thinking about how we communicate, because I also know, having worked in a building, that it sometimes takes a significant event to make morale turn around. And sometimes it literally just is, oh, look, we just added 100 new students to our building and 15 new staff members, and all of a sudden it feels like we have a new workplace because we literally have a new workplace. But I guess I would just ask for us to think about how are we treating the people that we invest a large chunk of our resources in, and that they really feel valued. And so I know we've talked about this several times on the board of how do we do that for our staff, because we say it, but they have to feel it too. So I guess there's not really a question there. It's just raising up that, you know, are we making sure that our procedure is being followed, and are we treating people like humans? And I'm also just concerned about when we look at this data, not the healthcare cost, that was not what it was. There was something in the substitute placement rates that we're seeing a lower rate over the last few years, and I know that that's consistent across the state. And so I think that also helps us think, as we're doing some of our legislative work and advocating for funding, that we need to continue to think about how subs might fit into that picture, because I know some districts are going to models where they are hiring subs that are just kind of dropped into buildings and they know they're going to have a job every day. And I don't know what we do of that in Des Moines. I don't know how that could fit into our structure, but I do know there are districts across the state that are moving a little towards that on classified for sure, and I think certified as well. So just wanted to raise up too that I see that in our data that we're having trouble placing subs, and I just did not want that to not be mentioned. So,
Natasha.
Not exactly sure what I can add. Minus, I know this is a conversation, I think every time we get to this report, we talk about, you know, the difference between our departments and our staff and treatment. It doesn't really show up necessarily in the slides, but we've consistently had this conversation. So I think it's great. I applaud everyone that came up to speak, because I know it can be awfully scary, especially when you're talking to, you know, the governing board and the superintendent, for those that are still with the district. So I think it's a great opportunity to kind of add that human voice. We've heard stories, all of us have interacted with different staff. I just feel like it just seems to be building over time too, and to hear more stories. And so I definitely think we're kind of at a critical moment, especially, you know, I think they're showing us that, and seeing the turnover rate and the lack of retention rate for our bus drivers is something that we just, I'm gonna probably vote no on this without feeling comfortable with what is going on district-wide for our employees.
Other board questions or comments? Do we do exit interviews?
Yes, everyone that fills out a formal resignation form online is sent an exit interview.
What's our return rate on those?
It's low. I could get more details for you for last year, but it's typically low.
Is it short, easy to answer? A few
Yes.
questions?
Yes.
So is it open-ended, multiple choice, combination of both?
Both.
Combination of both.
Okay,
We can share that with you if you'd like to see it as well.
okay.
Terry, I have one more
Yes,
thing.
Cindy.
Me, as Kirsten was speaking about the substitute placement rate, because when we're looking at that, we're looking at percentages. We don't have numbers though, do we? Like actual. I don't have that in front of me. Say that again.
I thought reading through it, it's something about the number of periods that were filled. Is that right or no?
Where is that again?
I don't think we have the end.
The only reason I say that is, you know, you mentioned it being an issue across the state, but then, and originally I thought about it as a needing to, which we do, we need to get to placement of substitutes at 100%. But then what I'm curious about too is what does that number look like as far as, why are our teachers gone? So it's going to be illness and other things, but are there other reasons that we have absences?
I was going to say,
That
having been in
that
a
would be good
secondary
to know.
building, not necessarily in Des Moines as an employee, sometimes it's coaches, and so then it's staff members covering. I think, would that be correct, Tom, that might account for some of where subs weren't placed, is because it might be a coach where there's a teacher covering for like a 7th, 8th period, or?
I don't think that.
No? Okay.
I don't think that affects it.
That's not, so that wouldn't even be calculated into this?
Right.
Okay, but that does get to the issue then of potentially how are teachers being asked to cover for other teachers in those situations or in others, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can give you some actual numbers in terms of what we average on a daily basis. We average approximately 75 associates gone a day and 250 or 200 teachers gone a day.
And do we know the nature of their absences generally? Is that reported or?
50% of the absences are usually around either family ill or personal illness.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other board comments or questions? So I heard a couple of different things around the board table, and I'm wondering how we want to proceed with this monitoring report. I heard the need for additional information and at least filling in the blanks relative to some of the speakers that came this evening. I heard maybe feeling a level of unreadiness, if you will, around whether or not we should proceed with approval. I'm looking for direction from my board colleagues about how you want to handle this monitoring report.
One thing as we're talking about this is to remember that this is 28, our last year's data.
Last year's data.
So just keeping that at top of mind as we decide.
Yep.
Well,
So we would be
Right.
voting approval on the compliant
acceptance of
designation of
compliance.
this, correct?
Correct.
So if as a board member, you would feel that this would either be partially compliant or non-compliant, then the correct action would be to vote no tonight. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Based on the KPI.
Based on the KPIs that were put forth?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Langford.
I don't know if this goes against. Cindy, tell me if this is or any board colleague, if this is would require us to do policy work, but some of our other reports we look at in 2 parts, right? Kind of like this is the pre and this is what we're expecting. And I'm wondering if there could be, for me, as an individual board member, would be partially compliant because I don't see, again, for me, it's missing kind of like the staff voice and then particularly around their treatment. Like in our reports around treatment of students, treatment of staff, employees, volunteers, I appreciate the surveys that have been incorporated that allow us to get that information from who the report is affecting directly. and I do know we've had this conversation over the course of a couple of years since I've been on the board as well. I don't know how my board colleagues feel. That's something that I feel I would like to see in this report. I would mark it as partially compliant currently. I do believe that, you know, I don't know how we move forward. What I'm struggling with is how we integrate the information that we've received tonight into our monitoring and how those two come together. If not, we're hearing some concerns raised up from a particular department that definitely is our staff. And so I'm wondering, is this a form of external monitoring that we want to explore? Does this directly tie with this monitoring report that's up for approval this evening? I guess my thought would be, I think there's some more pieces, and I would be comfortable figuring out what a part two of this would look like what do we want to see as a board from this report, and then having a part two in the spring to see if concerns were addressed.
So I think if we proceeded that way, we'd sort of be comparing, we wouldn't be comparing the same timeframes unless we were specific about the data that we used for the part two being in the same time period of the data that's included in this report. So that's one thing that we would have to, you know, set out as a caveat. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just think it's really important that that we're evaluating a report on a policy as the policy is written, and not how we desire it to be written, because it's very difficult to. This is has been a challenging report since its inception, well before my time, and we've worked really hard to be responsive to what the board wants. Without changes in the policy, and I think it's it feels like shifting sands to you know, to look for something that's not indicated in the policy.
Does anybody have a copy of the policy?
It's at the top of your report, monitoring report.
The only differing opinion I would offer on two reports versus one is in the cases where we've asked for 2 or 3 monitoring reports a year, it's because the information changes over the year.
Mm-hmm.
It's testing data that, you know, you do an initial test in the fall, and then you have maybe you have a second one in the winter, or maybe you just do the summer report.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the way I would look at, you know, your point, which I agree with, you know, in general is, you know, and I think where we've, you know, where we can go to is, okay, hey, let's think about it. Let's make some changes, possibly how we want to do it. Is I don't necessarily think I don't personally want 2 separate reports on this.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to get one good report, because I don't think the information is going to change from the first half of one year to the first half of the next year in this type of report. Mm-hmm. It's going to change more in the student data stuff that we do.
My sense of her asking for maybe a 2.0 of this was to have the benefit of the opportunity to get the other data, maybe not necessarily to split the reports over time permanently, but rather the benefit of the other piece of the data that helps inform the decision. That's how I interpreted what she was asking for, not 2 separate monitoring reports calendared at 2 different times in the year.
That is correct.
Okay.
Can I also really quick, because I do want to address Dr. Ahart, because I think this is good that we are working this out. I think we need to. Can I see that really quickly?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. Because to me, they go together. When I'm looking at this monitoring report and the policy states,
Here it is.
I don't know why I can't find it on my, because I remember Cindy and I working on pieces of these. I think we did treatment of students, but the language is reflected in this as well. And it states, with respect to the treatment of employees, the superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions that are unreasonably unsafe, unfair, inequitable, or undignified. And so when I think about some of the things that were raised this evening, we need more context, because that falls within that policy. And so what I think we're grappling with is, as the board, we determine the policy, you determine the KPIs. and with the administration, and ideally with us in conjuncture. And I know we've had this conversation before about whether the KPIs give us a sufficient evidence to say that whether this policy, we're meeting those expectations or not. What I'm saying is, I think from what we've heard from some of our speakers that came this evening, there could be some discord. However, we haven't created a venue for us to receive that sort of external data.
Oh, I agree, but I would also reference the sub-policies underneath it that,
Sure.
that drill down and are more specific, which is really what helps generate how we decide what KPIs would be responsive to the policy.
Sure. Okay, we can work through, I mean, yes, I hear that. I think there are some concerns even when we drill down into these sub-policies.
Oh, yeah,
We're on the same page,
Yeah,
I think, with that.
yeah.
So the question is, how do we move forward? And are we going to approve this report? And is there a place for external monitoring in terms of approving this report, or are we comfortable with approving it as is? I would personally say, I don't know, maybe it's not a part 2, but there definitely needs to be some more context for me, particularly around our classified staff.
So the other thing I think another option could be to amend, did we have a motion already? If
We
not,
do not have a motion.
was to make a motion to table until board members can get clear, can get more context, can get answered whatever questions and gain whatever clarity, and bring this back at another meeting where we would maybe have a level of comfort in accepting or not, or what have you. That's just a thought.
This is the monitoring report for the 2018 fiscal year, right? So 2017, 2018. So we're 5 months since then. And so some of the experiences we were hearing were from this school year. And so I think it's difficult when we're removing it that far. And I know we have a calendar and I know we have to place things as a reason, but for some of these things, when really timely feedback about the most immediate year would make the most sense, I'm just wondering if as a board, we might want to consider moving this monitoring report to like July or August before the new school year has begun, because for a lot of our staff, that last year would be most recent in their memory instead of this year. So then I always want to hear those comments, but then as a board, we're not struggling with, well, we're hearing this feedback about this year and we want to respond to that, but what we're actually voting on is for last year. And so that just might make it a little bit more clear on what we're responding to and voting on, maybe.
Okay, so I've heard a couple of different things. I've heard need more information. I've heard a motion to potentially table, and I've heard the option of moving the monitoring report to a different time in our schedule, which I think is something that we can address, likely not immediately as part of this conversation. So the floor is open for a motion from any of my board colleagues.
I'm going to make a motion to table until the board can get more clarity and context.
Second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to table the action on monitoring report 2.3, treatment of employees, until the board can get more information and context. Discussion.
Can we put a timeline with that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. A timeline, and also what we mean when we say clarity and information. So I think we need to be clear about what additional information we need in order for us to take the appropriate action. And what I might recommend is that our board leadership confer with board colleagues between now and the next week and identify what those key pieces of information are that we need, make sure that the superintendent has that, and then set the time certain that the report will come back. Is that reasonable?
Yep, that's reasonable for me.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to table, with the chair and the vice chair conferring with board members to identify the information that we'd like to have back, conveying that information along with the time certain to the superintendent, and then bringing the report back for board discussion and action. Any further discussion or comment? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. So we will proceed accordingly. Thanks to the speakers for coming this evening. And we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item number D4, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018. I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the matter.
All right, this is our favorite time of year.
It's the happiest time of the year.
This is the, as you see in front of you,
178 pages of genuine law.
It's it's a big document, but it's actually, especially for this type of document, it's a very, very useful and high quality document. I'll turn things over to Nick and Thomas and our guest from RSM.
Perfect. So you guys all received a draft of the CAFR on October 16th. It is rather lengthy. I hope you all enjoyed the read. And then we went to the audit committee and walked the audit committee through it. Kevin and Andrew did from RSM, had a very, very thorough discussion there and a very thorough review. We did that on October 31st, and we're bringing the formal finalized draft and the deliverables to you guys this evening for approval. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
All right. Good evening. My name is Kevin Smith with RSM. As Nick mentioned, we went through the results of the audit with the audit committee last week. We also meet with the audit committee before we begin the audit process and go through kind of the scope and the timing of the audit and answer any questions that the audit committee has. So tonight we've got just a brief presentation that'll kind of outline the results from the audit. This first slide here, the primary objective of the audit is to express an opinion on the financial statements and whether they're in conformance with generally accepted accounting principles. So I'm pleased to report that the opinion that was given that you see in the CAFR is an unmodified or a clean opinion. So that is the highest level of assurance you can receive over your financial statements. There weren't any new accounting pronouncements this year that had an impact on the financial statements, so the information you see this year is going to be relatively comparable to what you saw last year. One of the letters that you have in the documents is a report to the board, so these next couple of slides just outline some of the things that are included within that letter. One of the things here talks about significant accounting estimates. So here we've just got a list of some of the estimates that are included within the financial statements. These are things that we look at as a part of our audit process. The more significant ones here probably relate to some of the pension disclosures and the OPEB disclosures that you have in your report. We did not have any issues with any of these assumptions and did conclude that they were all reasonable. And there we go. A couple other things to point out here. We did not have any audit adjustments as a part of our audit, which is something that you always want to see. The information that was given to us from Nick and Thomas and their team was in good order, and we received that timely in order to prepare an efficient and an effective audit. Again, no difficulties or disagreements with management in the performance of the audit. We had access to all departments and employees and all of the information that we did request from the district. Oops. Another part of our audit is looking at compliance with certain federal grant programs. We refer to this as our single audit. The first bullet here talks about internal controls over financial reporting. So as a part of our audit, we don't give an opinion on internal controls, but we do look at controls as they relate to your financial statements. And if we had any issues that came about that rose to a level of being significant or material, those would have been reported to you in writing. We did not report any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. The single audit is the audit over the federal grant programs. So we look at different grant programs each year, typically on a rotational basis, so that your larger programs are looked at least every 3 years. This year, a Title I program and the Transforming School Climate grant programs were reviewed. So those programs made up about 29% of the district's total federal expenditures. For the federal requirements, require us to look at least 20% of your federal expenditures. So we did exceed that threshold, and we did not have any findings to report, so we did issue unmodified or clean opinions on those programs that we looked at as well. And again, no instances of non-compliance as it relates to those grants. And then this last slide here just shows a history of the single audit. You'll see the past several years, very clean audits from a finding standpoint. You have to go back several years before you see any more than one finding or one instance of noncompliance. So in 2018, all of those are, in 2017, we didn't have any issues. And pleased to report that's the same goes for 2018. This does help maintain your low risk status from a single audit standpoint, which keeps the cost of the audit down and also the work that we perform and that we ask of management also keeps that low by maintaining this good, clean record. Any questions on the slides or anything about the audit process or anything in the CAFR? I'd be happy to answer them or ask Nick to answer them for you.
Any board questions? Yes, Mr.
I do not
Barron.
have a question. I don't. No, trust me, I asked my questions on Wednesday on the audit committee, and I just wanted to express my appreciation for our staff for yet another clean and unmodified, or securing us another clean and unmodified audit. And I think it speaks well to the processes and the people that we have implementing those, and I feel very good about that. I think the audit committee had a good conversation. This was a clean opinion, but the audit committee had, I think, really good questions to ask of the auditors, and we talked about a lot of information that I found really enlightening. So this has been a good process, and it's a committee that I think is serving its purpose quite well.
Additional board comments or questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
I think that's it on that one. No. No action on the CAFR.
There's action.
Action. I was on the wrong page, I'm sorry. I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018. We have a motion from Anderson, second from Ellsburn. Are there any additional comments or questions? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 7-0. Next item on our agenda is item number D5, the Des Moines Teacher Retirement System Resolution for reading of amendment to allow cash-out retirement options. I'll ask the superintendent if he wants to introduce this item. Is there a presentation?
No presentation. I'll just offer Thomas to make some comments as he's been working more closely with this than I have directly. But in essence, it's to just provide some additional flexibility for our DMTRS members.
Well, as you know, we have formally ended the attempt to merge with IPERS. That is now closed. And now we move to we have formally closed our negotiations with IPERS. So now we are on to Plan B, whatever Plan B tends to be. But our initial step is to begin to build some flexibility for those actives who are still working here for the district. When they reach the age of 55, that they can, if they want to, they can opt out and take all that money with them in a lump sum, which is currently not available. And what you've been asked to do tonight, basically, is to just sort of read through that thing and wait 30 days, then the amendment will go into effect. There will probably be some other amendments that will be coming forth, and that is this idea of portability. If you have someone, if they decide to leave our district before they reach the age of 55, they can take their money with them, which is a benefit that doesn't exist in IPERS. I mean, you kind of have handcuffs on if you work in education in Iowa initially, then decide to go someplace else. So we haven't sorted out what the long-term, where this thing's in. And it continued to be a work in progress. And, we did spend, I want to thank the board And we also thank the IPER staff because we spent a tremendous amount of time, effort, and I use the term capital on getting as far as we did. So, thank you.
Great. So this comes as a recommendation of the advisory committee that I have the pleasure of serving on, and we had a meeting late last week to advance this. And so I am not going to read the resolution, but in essence, it gives individuals an opportunity to elect a lump sum distribution or to elect to convert a portion, either straight life annuity or partial refund. So I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the DMTRS resolution for reading of amendment to allow cash out retirement options.
Rolled right off the tongue.
We have a motion from Langford, second? Second. We have a motion from Natasha Newcomb, second from Natasha Newcomb. Are there any additional questions or comments, Rob?
Yeah, real quick. So you describe these as options that are not available through IPER. So is the idea to make this plan then more attractive?
No, I think this is just an option for those 346 people who are left in the plan, to give them an option. If they want to take it at 55, basically, take it in a lump, just take a lump sum. Right now, they don't have the option of taking a lump sum. And that's just one option. I don't know whether we're trying to make it competitive with IPERS, basically. I do think probably we ought to, this idea of portability it might make some sense too. You know, that portability, if they, if they decide to leave the district, they could, before they turn 55, they can take their, take their money with them.
So then the idea might be if they leave the district after 10 years, they could take that money and put it into like a 403B.
Something else with it.
Into the 403B or, okay.
Yes,
Or they
that's
could buy years in a state system.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, okay.
Because we do have some folks who are almost in their late 30s, late 40s in their plan. So that, yeah.
Okay.
Other board questions before we move to a vote? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item number D6, open enrollment late applications for denial. I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the item.
Yes, on your agenda tonight are those open enrollment applications that were not timely. So those go through the code-driven process for consideration, and those that are on the agenda tonight are those that were denied.
We have 3 requests, all of which are being recommended for denial. I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the open enrollment late applications for denial. Second? We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 7-0. We have a few things on the agenda for information only. Temporary construction easements at Windsor Elementary, and then we also have the minutes of the Head Start Committee for September. So I would call your attention to those items. And I think we're ready to move into our organizational meeting. So as everyone knows, we have a process for individuals who are interested in moving into a leadership role. That process was adhered to, and we had a couple of individuals who submitted their names for consideration to their fellow board members. So I would entertain a call for nominations in accordance with Board Policy 205 for the position of board chair.
Well, if I may, I would like to nominate Cindy Ellsburn for board chair.
We have a nomination of Cindy Ellsburn for board chair. I don't think we take nominations from the floor due to our process, so I would entertain a motion to close nominations and move to a vote. We have a motion and a second to close the nominations with the name Cindy Ellsburn having been advanced. Any further discussion? Please vote on the motion to close nominations. No, close nominations. Just close nominations and then, yeah, then ballot.
On yellow paper.
Motion passes. I don't know, I think I missed it, hit it wrong, but it's supposed to be 7-0.
I was confused, so.
Okay, so we now have our ballots, and we'll have to put in the name of the individual and then sign our name. I know, I got it. I hit no, I did too. Yeah.
Okay.
Goes in.
I have a vote for Cindy Ellsburn by Ms. Delagardelle Shelley. Cindy Ellsburn by Rob Barron. Cindy Ellsburn by Heather Anderson. Cindy Ellsburn by, who is that? Is that you? Yeah, sorry. Cindy by Cindy.
Cindy by Cindy.
Cindy by Cindy. Cindy by Deanna Langford. Cindy by Terry? No, who's this?
That's probably Heather. No. No, I think this one right here was Heather. Who's this?
Heather already, she already counted Heather's vote. It's either Cindy or Natasha.
Who's this? Okay.
Okay.
And the
You
last
guys
one's
have
me.
bads. And then Cindy by Terry. So
So we have a unanimous vote for Cindy Ellsburn to be our board chair. So Cindy, if you want to join me, and I will administer the oath of office. Do you, is this on?
the red light's supposed to be,
Red light's on?
red light's on, it's supposed to be working.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially, to the best of your ability, discharge the duties of the office of President of the Des Moines Independent Community School District as now or hereafter required by law? Congratulations. Thank you. Absolutely. Hi, Steph.
Oh, yeah, it's the musical chairs portion of the.
Yes. All right, so then I know. Oh, I don't have this word. Oh, here, wait a minute. You need the notebook back.
Yep.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, and now we move on to F2, election of the vice chair. And as Terry mentioned, by process, we had one board member who submitted their name, so I will take a, where am I here? Nomination for vice chair.
I'd like to, it's my pleasure to nominate Kirsten Delagardelle Shelley as vice chair of the Des Moines School Board.
Okay, and then we need to close the nominations. Thank you. Can we please vote on closing the nominations? Okay, and now we will do a ballot vote.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. Yeah. Thank you.
Do better signatures this time.
I did. I know I took my time.
Okay, vote for Kirsten by Rob, Kirsten by Heather, Kirsten by Terry, Kirsten by Cindy, Kirsten by Natasha, Kirsten by Kirsten, and Kirsten by Deanna.
Okay. Kirsten, if you'll join me. Larger one.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially, to the best of your ability, discharge the duties of the office of Vice Chair in the Des Moines Independent Community School District as now or hereafter required by law? Yes. Oh, congratulations. Okay. I yelled that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Next, we move to items of privilege. So I will defer first to my colleagues if there is anything that they would like to say, or any announcements you have. Yes. Still 30 minutes to vote. Okay.
I suppose I'm assuming everyone has had an opportunity to check their email, but I have formally submitted my resignation, and it'll be effective December 31st. Didn't prepare anything to share, but so I haven't posted it or anything else outside of the board, but this is kind of my first formal acknowledgement of it. But if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be here till December 31st, and good luck.
Thank you, Natasha.
We will definitely miss you.
Anyone else? Yep.
So, never to leave my post without direction. I thought I would just share with you just a few transition topics. These are things that we actually had on our work plan in the past year, and I thought that I would pass those along as just a reminder of some of the things that we said we would do, and this is really an opportunity for the new folks to determine how best they'd like to proceed, but I didn't want to leave some of these things on the table, recognizing that many of them speak to even some of the things that we discussed tonight, and obviously moving forward, I think give us an opportunity to be really thoughtful about next steps. So a chair's job is never done, right?
Exactly.
So, and then secondly, the last two meetings, of course, I missed because I was on the continent of Africa and had a fabulous trip. And so I just have a few things that I'm sharing with my board colleagues. As you know, this was the 100-year birthday celebration of Nelson Mandela. And so this is just a little token that I brought back from Robben Island for my board colleagues, Sharon and Tom, to enjoy. And it has some wonderful quotes from Nelson Mandela on the bag, and the bag looks sort of like this. So just enjoy. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And then on the front, at Council of Great City Schools, one of the giveaways that they had on our tables were these really cute little magnets. And so I brought one back for everybody just so that you can enjoy that as well. So thank you for the opportunity to serve. It's been a wonderful 2 years. Our work is never done, but I really appreciate and enjoy the opportunity to have chaired for the last 2 years, and appreciate all of the extra work that we all put in to get it done. We don't always get it right, but we work towards getting it right, and I know that with our new leadership, we'll continue to do really wonderful things. And Natasha, I'm sorry that we'll be missing you. in 2019, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have worked with you and know that you're not going to be far, and likely you'll be at this podium at some point in the next year. So thank you very much.
Anybody else have anything? Deanna?
Yeah, in this transition of leadership, I'm a social worker, so you all know I can be sentimental. So I do just want to take this time to publicly say that, Natasha, I was super sad to see that, but I also understand the importance of having to take care of yourself first. But know that as your colleague, like, you have challenged, I know, me for the better, and I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I think that your passion and persistence definitely helped shape my time personally and helped me grow a ton in this role. So thank you. It definitely gave me a model in some ways, of how to champion causes that are really important. And to our outgoing chair, you have done some work these last 2 years in corralling all of us to keep us on a schedule, and you continually set the bar for what exemplary leadership looks like. And so, thank you.
My pleasure.
And to our new team, I'm so excited. This is gonna be good. This is gonna be really, really good. I'm done.
Anybody else want to say anything? Yeah, sure.
Okay. So today's election day, and I have spent a lot of time today both thinking about tonight in lots of reasons. One, for our meeting because of the huge task I think we had of all the important items on our agenda on a night like this, and I'm so glad to see like we still have people with us after several hours. But I also just want to say that when I considered doing vice chair, I want to let the community know that it was not a decision that I took lightly, and it's something that I'm looking forward to fully participating in this new role, but also continue to work in the community to raise the profile of the school board and to continue to educate our community. And particularly, I want to talk to my under 35 folks who don't have kids yet, who maybe aren't planning on having kids, but love this community, that the work that we do in this community with our kids on our school board is the foundation for all of the successful things that we want to do as a city and a community. And that if we don't have strong public schools in our community, then it's going to make everything else in our city in 20 years a little bit harder. If you've been following some of the work the city council is doing, I know that they're looking to, a Des Moines that looks much like our district by 2040. And so I think we have a great opportunity to get it right here, to help lay a great foundation for what this community is going to look like in 22 years. So I just wanted to raise that up and just know that I'm going to hopefully continue to have conversations with young people in our community about why schools are so important, even if they're not yet thinking of kids for all varieties of reasons. So,
Anybody else? Okay, I will go ahead and tell you, Terry, that it has been an absolute pleasure being your vice chair for the last 2 years. I appreciate definitely your organization and keeping us on task with the transition topics, and I know you will be close at hand as both Kirsten and I move into these roles. And Kirsten, I'm looking forward to working with you, and then with the rest of the board as we journey forward. And what I will say is start checking your emails soon, because there will be various topics as we discuss in agenda planning. And now with Natasha's announcement, board vacancy issues, we'll just be watching your emails for information, because we'll probably need to be organizing some things via email prior to our next meetings. And I will echo what others have said as well, Natasha, and also sorry to see your resignation, also understand, and glad you will be here through the end of the year to help us through this. I know, but you're not dying, but it'll be a big change, and I'm glad you're staying with us to the end of the year to help see the process of replacement. So not replacement, somebody else that will sit in that chair. Can't replace you. I will turn it over to Dr. Ahart.
Okay, well, I just have a few quick things. I see Doug out there. I just want to congratulate the DMEA, all 3 of their units recertified with flying colors. Not a surprise, but that's a nice step to have out of the way and just re-solidify the good work that DMEA does on behalf of 3,000 employees, roughly. So that's a good step to have out of the way. As I shared with Natasha, I am sorry to see you go, but I do want to let everyone know that statewide, I told her this too, I said, I anticipated someone to, I had no idea who, but somebody would probably leave before 4 years was up, because since the state changed the law from a 3-year term to a 4-year term, across the state, that number has gone up for very good reason. This is very demanding work, and it's even more demanding at DMPS. And so the odds that, somebody not being able to foresee 4 years out where they're going to be in their life at that time is very understandable. And I want to thank you for your leadership and for your work on behalf of our students and staff. Terry, it was nice to have you back at the board chair seat for 2 additional years. Thank you very much. We've come a long way in 2 years under your leadership. And to the rest of the board, I know this is sort of a time of reflection because we're sort of turning the page, and this is a new board, same members, but a little bit different organization. If you think back to where we were, the election of 2016, these have not been 2 easy years from a societal standpoint in being in public schools. And so your work was tougher over the last years than it's been probably in a decade or 2 prior to 2016. And I appreciate you standing for the rights of our students especially, and our staff, and letting all of us have a voice in being actively engaged and meaningfully engaged with our community. It makes a huge difference, not just in the district, but in the greater community. So I want to recognize that and publicly state my admiration and appreciation.
Thank you. And with that, I will now adjourn the regular meeting of the board for November 6th, 2018.